but I'm here in hope and expectation that you are here not just for yourself tonight, but you're here for each other. And you're here to repair this nation.
Well, the State House isn't in session, but summer in South Carolina still means the Palmetto State is a hotbed for politics. That's California Governor Gavin Newsom did a 2-day tour of this state for what most think is a bit of a test run for a possible presidential run in 2028. How about that? That's where we begin this Sunday in South Carolina. A way too early look at the race for the White House, but it's going to be here before you know it. Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson on the road over my shoulder this week as we get you connected to the Capitol. Okay, Newsom was here. State Republicans, they weren't so happy he was here. They said he could keep his California politics out west, but he was going corner to corner in South Carolina. And even though he says he's not running for president, come on now, we know what's happening here.
Hope and expectation. This is really the theme of this visit. And even though, as you said, there's nothing definite, nothing announced at this point, we've heard this song and dance before. Nonetheless, South Carolina is key. It's pivotal to any politicians, Republican or Democrat, their hopes for the White House. It was true for Biden in 2020. It's going to be true in 2028. Any Democrat hoping to make a run for the White House is going to have to come to South Carolina in order to connect with Black voters, with rural communities, with the faith-based Democrats, and to be able to make that early mark in the race where South Carolina really is a make it or break it state.
I think the other part about that, Brian, is this is a place where the Democrats have decided that they're going to have to get themselves on some sort of pep rally tour to start getting people interested in being involved, because South Carolina has now become so strongly Republican. You can't get much more of a red state. And in this particular case, Catherine, I think when we see that, Crystal Spain and the South Carolina Democratic Party are trying to get to those corners all across the state. So they brought in Newsom this week. They brought in Andy Beshear. The governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, was here for their major gala just a few weeks ago. And so this is their time to say, hey, listen, we're going to have to start getting some level of energy and excitement about what's going on.
And before we get to 2028, too, a big part of the message in each of those roughly 8 stops or so that Newsom did throughout the state of South Carolina was rallying support for the midterm election. The term he used was he wants South Carolina's Democratic voters, all voters, in fact, he's trying to appeal to all he could, to exercise what he called their moral authority against the Trump White House and the GOP at large.
That's right. You know, every couple of years, it seems, we get this talk of a red wave, a blue wave, some major turnover. And again, South Carolina could be pivotal there, especially if we see any kind of shift in the politics.
Yeah, and I think when you pair that with all this talk about the big, beautiful bill and the impact that that's going to have down the line, because keep in mind, we are simply 11 months away now from the Republican and Democratic primaries in our state. This is going to be a place where you're going to decide who's going to be the nominee, who's not going to be the nominee for those U.S. House seats. And we're up here in D.C. right now, and it is razor thin close right now. When you take a look at the leadership of the House, you split 2 or 3 seats in the country going the other direction. You got a brand new speaker. You've got Democrat control of at least one house of Congress. And that's a place right now where I think the Democrats are saying, we've got to do something, because as it stands right now, they only control about 18 of the state legislatures right now. And they have a very thin minority when you take a look at it over in the U.S. House.
And it may take all that time until the vote to actually get to the bottom of what's in this big, beautiful bill and what the impact is, because 800 pages long. Most of us have not read the whole thing. Few of us have, but we're few and far between. And so for most people, it's going to take a long time, months to years, to really trickle down and see exactly what's going to happen, what the fallout is from this piece of legislation.
And Brian, we've talked about this last week. You think about what's in that bill right now. You've got cuts to Medicaid, and that is health insurance for a good portion of South Carolinians, especially in the poor and rural areas of our state, which are numerous.
In some populations, the percentage of the population that's on Medicaid is 50% plus. And so those are populations that may be severely impacted.
those rural areas were largely where Newsom brought his tour, and it really was a state Democratic Party tour. They're trying to connect with those rural areas. As we look at the history, you touched upon it a little bit, Catherine, the history of South Carolina on the road to the White House. Traditionally, they pick the nominee in the Republican and Democratic primaries. It is something that South Carolina kind of wears a badge of honor about. They like to be first in line. During the 2020,
right.
Yeah, that's right. We get it right. But during 2024's primary season, state Democrats really fought to have that number one spot. They say they're going to do it again. They believe in their voters. Both parties believe in their voters in this state. The history on this is pretty incredible. It goes back decades.
I think the thing that you have to look at is it was an interesting move by the Democrats in 2024, because not only were they the first in the South, which is typically the way that it works, because keep in mind, normally it's Iowa's first, then New Hampshire, then South Carolina. But the Democrats completely turned it and put South Carolina first in 2024. And honestly, I think that was a move by some of the Democrats to say, hey, listen, we're going to make sure that we block out anybody who could be of any level of competition with then President Joe Biden. And Biden then, of course, turns around, wins the nomination, and then, everything else that transpired from that, dropping out of the race, Kamala Harris coming in. But are they going to be able to keep that number one spot, being the first in the nation? Don't know if that's going to be happening or not.
And I think that's part of it. But I also do believe it was a strategic move to really evaluate South Carolina, pretty red state. How are voters in South Carolina going to react, and who are they going to be pushing forward, advancing towards the White House? I think that's another key aspect of why you would put South Carolina first.
And you also have to keep in mind one key name in this entire thing, Brian: Jim Clyburn. He was there with Wes Moore. He was there with Gavin Newsom. You can be guaranteed he's going to be there with Andy Beshear, because he is, in essence, the godfather of the Democratic Party in South Carolina.
He is the kingmaker. He brought new life to the Biden camp when Joe Biden won the White House. So whoever then the Democratic Party gets the nod from Jim Clyburn is going to be in the driver's seat when that time comes, and it'll be here before.
That's definitely true.
It'll definitely be here before we know it. When we come back on Connect to the Capitol, we're going to focus squarely on state-level politics, because we have some more people throwing their hats into the ring for some of those statewide races coming up in 2026. That's when we come back.
It's time for Horry and Georgetown County to have a statewide candidate. It's never happened in the history of South Carolina. Today's the day, y'all.
Senator Stephen Goldfinch making it official. We thought this was going to be the case. He is going to enter the Attorney General's race in 2026 as a Republican. And as you heard him say, looking to make a little bit of history. Well, he already has, because he's the first to declare so far for the Attorney General's race. So let's talk about that. That put him in the driver's seat or what? He's first on the list.
It definitely puts his name out there first, but keep in mind, we've also heard the name David Pascoe recently. Pascoe was that special prosecutor that was put in for a number of things that were going on at the South Carolina State House, had gained some name ID, but was a Democrat. He switched to from the Democratic to the Republican Party just recently. And so there's the good sense that he's probably looking to make his name one who's going to be on that list, as well as word has it right now, the governor's son, Henry D. McMaster, is even giving that consideration now.
That's true. And when we're looking at this race, such as it's shaping up to be, the real question for me is looking at these candidates' records. We're looking at someone who is known as being very conservative, tough on crime, and is that going to help or hurt in the long run statewide, especially in the ups and downs as it leads into Election Day?
Of course. We all were theorizing about Pascoe in this, because as he shifted to the Republican Party about a month and a half, 2 months ago, with the expectation that Alan Wilson was going to join the governor's race, which he has now done. Speaking of the governor's race, the lieutenant governor, Pamela Evett, she has what we're going to call, or what she is calling, a special announcement coming up this week.
What could it
be? Like we discussed the other day, she's declaring for the NBA draft, is what we said. But I don't think that's what's really happening.
I think she's going for Dawn Staley's job on that one. But
that's not what's happening, though. I think we can read the tea leaves.
I think that the tea leaves are very, very clear right now. Pamela Evett is trying to run on the coattails that she has ridden with Henry McMaster as governor of South Carolina. She's lieutenant governor now. That is a natural step forward for her. The thing that you have to ask, though, Catherine, is does she, even in that position, have enough name ID out there to be able to garner the level of support? And are the people who were behind Henry McMaster going to be behind her?
That's a really good question, Dave, and especially when, people in Columbia know her well, but outside of Columbia, maybe a little bit less name ID. Nonetheless, she is positioning herself as the heir apparent to Governor McMaster and is trying to, again, ride on those coattails of workforce development, pro-business economy, rural development, all these different aspects, education, that have really been the hallmark of Governor McMaster's tenure.
So the one question that's going to come up, and this is just South Carolina politics playing itself out, is she's not from this state. She is the lieutenant governor. She is from the state of Ohio. She moved here. She has a business here. And the question that comes is, for some South Carolina voters still, is, are you really from around these parts? And that is a question that folks are going to be asking, and she's going to have to be answering. The other part of it, too, though, is who's going to try to wrap themselves in the MAGA flag as much as possible? Because the populist candidate right now, Pam Evett, even in her special announcement, said that she was the MAGA lieutenant governor. And so there's the question right now, who's going to be able to pull the MAGA vote out?
And the person that we've seen endorsing a lot of President Trump's initiatives, current actions, is the current Attorney General, Alan Wilson.
Right.
He goes to a lot of the events, whether it's in Washington, whether it's Mar-a-Lago. Alan Wilson is positioning himself as an ally, so to speak, of President Trump right now.
And I don't think the president is going to be able to turn around and put any sort of endorsement at this point in time on a primary candidate in the state of South Carolina, because everybody's been supportive of him, and that's what you have when you have a populist president like Trump is.
And he likes to win, so he's not going to want to put his seal of approval on a candidate who ends up coming in second or third place, particularly when, as you said, so many of them are trying to wrap themselves in that MAGA flag, that don't tread on me flag, and really position themselves as not even necessarily Governor McMaster's successor, but President Trump's
Nominee,
fill in
the blank.
Yeah.
His favorite person.
Yes.
His favorite person. Well, his favorite person, as you noted, is the one who wins. And we're going to know soon enough because there'll be a runoff, and then maybe the endorsement may come then because we're going to have such a crowded field. All right, that's going to wrap up that segment on speaking about the governor. When we come back, Catherine did an interview with Vicki Ringer of Planned Parenthood just a few days ago, talking about that Supreme Court ruling as it applies to Planned Parenthood and Medicaid funding. This is linked to the abortion issue, not entirely about it, but linked to it. That interview coming up when we come back.
Seven years ago, Governor Henry McMaster signed an executive order to cut Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood for preventative treatments and other non-abortion services, a move that set up a legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Just a few days ago, the court handed down a decision that has far-reaching implications, not on abortion, but individual patient rights to choose their own doctor. Today, we are joined by Vicki Ringer, Director of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, to unpack what this means for South Carolina patients, for state authority, and for the very concept of enforceable rights. Vicki, so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Wonderful. So for those just tuning in, what is Medina versus Planned Parenthood really about, and what do you believe is at the core of this decision? Why should the average South Carolinian care?
Well, the case is about the governor's ability to kick Planned Parenthood out of the Medicaid program and deny patients the right to come to Planned Parenthood for their non-abortion services, their preventative health care. And honestly, this is a political move. That was the only message in that. They never denied that we were a qualified provider of reproductive care.
That's right. You are, in fact, licensed to practice medicine in the state as an organization.
Absolutely.
Right. So people sometimes do frame this as an abortion debate, but by the time it gets up to the Supreme Court, that's not what's being discussed at all. And in fact, this ruling applies far beyond that and impacts whether individuals can enforce federal rights at all. So From your perspective, how does this decision affect the ability of any patient, whether they agree with Planned Parenthood or not, to choose their own healthcare provider? And what's the bigger legal and human story here?
Well, I think we've got to look a little bit at the context, the history. When Congress passed the free choice of provider law, it was because states were choosing winners and losers. They were picking their pals to accept Medicaid and to get rich off of government funds. And just 2 years after the implementation of Medicaid, they came back and said, no, any qualified provider, patients can choose their provider so long as that provider is willing to accept Medicaid. And so for 60 years, we operated under that. And then suddenly, the political climate and the insistence on banning abortion after the Dobbs decision led legislators and the governor to take this step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson was on in the past few days and shared with us some thoughts.
The Supreme Court says no, South Carolina has a right to determine who is a qualified medical provider. It's important for people to understand that there are 2 Planned Parenthood facilities in the state of South Carolina and hundreds of other medical providers. So it's not like we are saying that people are not going to have access to health care. There's 2 facilities in the entire state, and states do have the right to make these decisions, and the Supreme Court ratified that in this decision.
What is your response to that? Is healthcare really interchangeable, or does that doctor-patient relationship matter in ways that the legal regime and the law may not always understand?
Absolutely. Planned Parenthood has long been considered an expert in reproductive care. We've been in existence for 100 years, long before abortion was legal. We're seen as birth control experts. And to prove that the Attorney General's premise is wrong, right after the governor's initial executive order, we checked with providers all over the state to see where we could refer our patients. We could find not a single provider who could see a patient in less than 3 months.
That's heartbreaking. A lot of people saw those defund Planned Parenthood signs, and they celebrated the decision as a pro-life win without really understanding what the case is about at its core. Because this case doesn't just affect reproductive health even, it could reshape access to care more broadly, and even federal rights generally, education, health care, civil rights. So what are the long-term consequences here that could come out of this case?
Well, we're seeing that right now. We're living that through the reconciliation bill as well. But whenever individuals don't have the right to sue the government to enforce the rights that they've been guaranteed, then what is the level of compliance and how do you enforce that? With this ruling, the court has said, no, sorry, y'all can't do that. Somebody else has got to bring that. The federal government has to enforce that. And of course, under this administration, that won't happen.
I've also, from my perspective, thought that this could actually cut both ways, that in a different state or even a future administration, the same logic could be applied to mandate certain providers or exclude others for political reasons. So, for example, a state could say, we will not fund Medicaid dollars to this entity unless they actually perform abortions. Can you just give your take on that just briefly? And for those who believe in strong state authority, is there any common ground left in this debate?
Well, I think what's wrong is that we've got a low participation in the political environment. We have the 5th lowest voter participation in the nation. And every poll, even those conducted by conservative outlets, have shown that the majority of taxpayers, majority of citizens in South Carolina believe abortion should be legal in some or all cases. But our legislators are not acting under that. They're doing just the opposite. But yes, this is going to have long-term effects, and it will ping-pong back and forth depending on the administration who's in office, and it puts patients in a confusing situation where they don't know where to turn for health care.
Absolutely. And Vicki, thank you for joining us on the program, and we'll have more for you all at home on our Connect to the Capitol Extra.
Finally this week on Connect to the Capitol, another chapter linked to the saga surrounding embattled lawmaker, Republican lawmaker R.J. May, faces those 10 federal counts of child porn distribution. This story develops by the moment, it would seem. Now, he's being held right now without bail in a jail here in South Carolina, but someone who has been very vocal about that case and about the Freedom Caucus, of which May was once a part of, now been thrown out, but also a co-founder of it, is Representative Brandon Guffey. And he has skin in the game here when it comes to this type of online predatory type crime, because he lost a son to a sextortion scheme. So this is something that's very near and dear to him.
It definitely is. I mean, when Brandon Guffey came to the South Carolina State House, it was at a tumultuous time for his family. The loss of his son was absolutely devastating, but it was also one of those key things that was such an impassioned move on his part as a father to say, listen, you can't have this sort of sextortion play going on online, because it not only affects the children who are involved, but the mental health of them as well. And he became the crusader of this issue at the South Carolina State House, and almost unanimously, if not unanimously, passed the law that basically made sextortion illegal in South Carolina.
You know, for Brandon Guffey, this really is deeply personal, what he's experienced, the loss in his own family. And so he is on a crusade on this issue. He knows firsthand the impact and how it reaches out even beyond those directly affected into families, into friends, into the full community, and the kind of toxicity that's bred when you have this kind of crime, of evil being perpetrated online. And so for him, he's going to be one to call out hypocrisy when he sees it. And he certainly found it here. Oh, he definitely did, because, you know, you turn around and he's not a friend of the Freedom Caucus. Let's just put it that way. Make that clear. And he made that abundantly clear on numerous occasions. But Brian, do we still have that graphic?
We do. We have a tweet, Marcus, if you could put that. Yeah. This is from Guffey, where he says, this is the quote, Dave, "Know what I can't stand, an outright hypocrite. This was posted by, of course, a rep that has me blocked from pointing out her hypocrisy. Their protection is our duty. Yet when RJ's house was raided, the comment was he's an upstanding member," meaning of the Freedom Caucus, but not a single retraction to what he said. And he's referring to Representative April Cromer there when he says that. So this is this is getting tough.
Yeah. At what point, what lengths does someone have to go to prove that perhaps they are not an upstanding member of any political party or of society at large?
And this is one of those places where the Freedom Caucus was trying to stand behind him. And don't get me wrong, I can understand if you're a caucus member, you're going to stand with your members at first. But the reality is there's just way too much out there right now for there to be anything other than an absolute dismissal of him as a standing member in good standing in the South Carolina State House. And that's part of what we saw here.
That's true.
It all comes just days after that House Ethics panel actually hired that outside counsel to look into conduct unbecoming. Of course, it's not on the record who that is, but I think we can all connect the dots on that. Well, folks, that is all the time we have this week on Connect to the Capitol. Dave and Catherine on the road again, and being kind enough to check in with us every week and break things down for you so we can give you the news and information you need at home that affects your life. So, folks, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next Sunday here in South Carolina.
Have a good weekend.
Good night.